Hello, this is your instructor, Russ, and it's week 3 in our public speaking communications class. And so, what I want to do for this week is focus primarily on chapter 9. You have chapters 9 and 13 due. Chapter 13 is on informative speaking. Chapter 9 is specifically on how to do introductions and conclusions. That's what I want to focus on for today. But before we do that, I want to go through some of the assignments and things in your that's in your module 3 for this week. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. We're going to be looking at these different things. So at this point, you should be now looking at the screen, the modules. And I'm going to go to modules, and we're going to look at module 3. In module 3, you've of course got a quiz that's due by the end of the week, chapters 9 and 13. You've got a discussion, and this discussion is your opinion on a certain common saying about speeches. So look that over and answer that. You do need to reply to at least 2 classmates this week for that discussion, but you will not need to use your textbook, refer to it, or cite anything from your textbook. Here is an evaluation. You need to click on that and do an evaluation of yourself, of your own speech. What were your strengths and weaknesses? What did you think you did well? What are some things you could improve on? That is what you need to do for that evaluation. It's a completion assignment, meaning you complete the assignment, you get all the points. So it's important that you do complete that by the end of the week, by Sunday at midnight. Then your last assignment is this Dropbox assignment. It's basically to write an introduction and a conclusion that is going to be possibly used in your next speech, which is your demonstration speech, the informative speech with presentational aid. So I want to look at this because you'll notice in your introduction, there are different things that are listed here that I want you to use as labels. And then next to each or underneath of each is where you write your introduction, or you write your introduction and then you use these labels and place them in the introduction to tell me, what this is. This is my grabbing the audience's attention. This is my specific purpose, and so on in the speech. Then the conclusion, you do the same thing. You have these different labels that I want you to use in the conclusion, or put your conclusion next to underneath of these so that I can see that you understand what these are. Now, it's possible that your topic will not be the same as what you used for this introduction and this conclusion. It's possible that you change your topic. That's okay. This is simply for me to see that you understand these concepts and that you can put them into practice. All right, at this point, I'm going to stop the sharing. And I want to next kind of transition into what we're going to be talking about for today. We're going to specifically be talking about how to start speeches or presentations, how to end them. These are 2 very, very important things, because the way you begin, you want a good start, but it's even more important to have a good ending, a good finish. And so let's jump right into this. I'm again going to be sharing my screen with you. And when I share the screen, I'm going to be looking at a document that I've prepared. And this document starts with the introduction. There's 4 things, 4 functions of any introduction that you should begin with. So let's go ahead and begin with these. I'm going to label them number 1 through 4. And these are not necessarily in order. Some of them are, but some of them are not. So the first thing you need to do is you need to get the attention of the audience. That's the very first thing you need to do. And this is important because if you don't have their attention at the very beginning, then they're going to miss whatever it is that you talked about at the beginning. A second function is you need to relate the topic to the audience. And the way that we do this, we'll talk about in more detail, but the reason that you do this is you want to share some kind of common ground. We have this in common. This is what you're going to gain from listening to my speech. Here are the benefits for you. So that's how you relate the topic, or why you relate the topic to the audience. You also want to relate the topic to yourself. speaker. In other words, you want to tell the audience, why is it that you're talking about this topic? What makes you believable, an expert in this? Now, here we have the word ethos, a Greek word, ethos. And that word ethos means believability, credibility. Are you trustworthy? Can we believe you? You will show this by relating this topic to yourself. I call this also giving or listing your speaker's credentials. Okay. And that's what we do with that. Then the fourth one is introducing the topic. And in many times, you also preview the main points. So let's do this now. Let's go back through each one of these four. I'll tell you the order that I would recommend that you do each one of these four. Now, you have a limited amount of time to do all of these things. This time that you have, I figured out roughly should be 15% of your time should be devoted to the introduction. So in this case, for this speech that's 4 to 6 minutes, you're aiming for a 5-minute presentation. And so you've got 300 seconds total. So 15% of 300 is 45. So you have 45 seconds to do all four of these functions. The very first thing that I would do is I would do the attention getter. Read over chapter 9 and take a look at all different kinds of examples of different kinds of attention getters. You could start with a rhetorical question or even a direct question where you ask the audience something and you want them to respond. That's a direct question. You could start with a story. You could start by defining key terms or key words that you think might be confusing that the audience hadn't heard of before. You might want to start by describing something to the audience first. Give them some context. Give them some background before you actually begin your presentation. So there's lots of different things you can do to get the attention of the audience, but you must begin with that. I can always tell a beginning speaker is one that begins by announcing what the topic is instead of getting the attention of the audience. The second thing you should do is introduce the topic to the audience. Now, one thing I want to add here to this number 4 is we have a term for this. When you introduce the topic, when you preview the main points, we call that the central idea of your speech. So here is where, after the attention getter, the second thing is you should use your central idea. One sentence simply tells the audience, here's what it is I'm talking about today. I would not preview your main points if you're going to do that. I wouldn't do that yet in the introduction, but I would just hold off on that. Then the next thing, so you've got 2 things done. You've got the attention getter, you've done the central idea, at least one part of the central idea. Now you're ready for number 3 and number 4, and that's when you do here relating the topic to the audience, relating the topic to yourself. You could do these in any order, but let's just say you want to do them in the order that is listed there. So you would say something to the effect of, now at the end of my speech, what I hope that you will all gain from this speech is, and then tell us what it is. Maybe you're going to be describing a great recipe, a dessert you learned from your grandmother. And you started out the speech, the attention getter, by telling a story about when you were a young person and you went to your grandma's and she knew you were coming. And so she made this special dessert just for you. Well, you liked it so much that you wanted to demonstrate and show us as an audience how to make it. And so you've brought some samples and you could mention in your introduction, I think you'll agree with me after tasting these samples that this is one of the best desserts that you've ever had. And that's how you can relate it to the audience. You could also do something like, we're all college students. We all have that in common. And I have yet to find a college student that didn't like to eat. And most people like desserts as well. So I brought this dessert for us. And that's, again, how you're relating the topic to the audience. You need to relate the topic to yourself as a speaker as well. You need to say something to the effect of, I have personal experience with this topic. I've done this. I've made it. I called up my grandmother just last week in preparation for this speech, And I went over to her house and I made it with her, and she gave me some little pointers on what to talk about. You could also say that you've done research on your topic. If you've done that, you said, I've looked up things and I'll be sharing my information that I found in my research. Then at the end of the introduction, you then preview your main points, or at least tell us how many main points there are. So you could say that there's 3 things you need to know in order to make this dessert. Or you could say the 3 things you need to know in order to make this dessert are, and then you list the 3 things. So when you're done with all 4 of these functions in the order that I mentioned, you should be somewhere around 45 seconds for this speech, and you're ready then to transition into your first main point. So then you would say a transition statement like, let's start by looking at, and then mention what your first main point is. Now, at this point, I want to move down and I want to talk about the conclusion. The conclusion is shorter. It is only going to be 10% of your speech. So in a 300-second speech, you've got about 30 seconds for the conclusion. And there's 3 functions that you need to fulfill for any conclusion. One of those functions is you need to signal the ending. And you can do that either verbally or not verbally. Most commonly, we do it verbally. We say things like, to sum up, in conclusion. There's lots of different phrases that you can start your sentence with. But this tells the audience that you're coming to the close of your speech. In the same way that a captain gets on the speaker system, captain of a plane, when you're coming up to the airport and announces to all of the passengers that we're coming up. So there's certain things you need to do. So get ready for that. So you need to signal. You can also signal it non-verbally by doing something like this. I've just demonstrated a long pause for you. That's one way to signal your ending. You could also move from your position back to your original speaker's position where you started the speech from as another nonverbal way to signal the ending. The second thing that you should do is you should either summarize or restate your central idea. Now remember, the definition of central idea is the sentence that announced the topic, that previewed the main points. So maybe in this part, you would say, so in conclusion, today we've looked at the following 3 steps in how to make this fantastic dessert. And then you just restate them. Say what you talked about already. The third thing that you do at the very end of the speech is you end with a memorable statement. Or if it's a persuasive speech, you want them to do something, then you end with a call to action. You can also do a call to action in an informative speech, but typically you do a memorable statement, a memorable ending. You would use another kind of maybe attention getter, maybe tell another story. End with a quotation that you found that really sums up everything. Remember, your audience is going to remember the last thing you say probably more than anything else. You could tell the audience your philosophy, what you learned from this experience. So if you don't remember anything else from my speech today, then remember this. And then you tell them the very end. At the very end of the conclusion, you say thank you, and then you leave the speaking position and go back to your seat, you leave the room, whatever that you do. Ask, maybe there's a question and answer period that you'll have at the end. So to kind of recap, the introduction has 4 different functions that are listed there. Make sure you do each of those 4. And then the conclusion has 3 functions. You should do each of those 3. Now, what I find most beginning speakers have difficulty with is, first of all, starting with an attention getter. They want to start with the central idea. Start with the attention getter. Secondly, I have many students that just don't have a conclusion at all. They get to the end of their third or their last main point, and then they just end. They just say thank you. So we do need to have that conclusion, that bow that wraps everything up at the very end. All right. Well, that's information about introductions and conclusions. I really encourage you to read the announcement for Module 3. I go into much more detail about each of these, give you page numbers even to look up in your chapter 9 about different examples of different things. So hope you have fun creating your introduction and conclusion for this week. And let me know if you have any questions whatsoever. So this is your instructor, Russ, signing off. And until next time, we'll hope you have a great day and we'll see you soon.